Hi, this is Johnny, your friendly local realtor. Welcome to the September 2021 monthly market report. As we're approaching the fall season and into the fourth quarter of the year, we're starting to see buyer activity cooling down. And this is of course due to rising home prices, but to be more precise, it's because people are questioning affordability. We're going to look into this today, so please stay with me. One of the biggest news in the housing market now is the drop in pending home sales. I've talked about this last month because there are lots of news headlines about this out there. And let me show you what this drop in pending sales looks like graphically. If you look at this graph going all the way back to 2012, you see in March and April 2020 where we had a big drop in pending sales during the COVID lockdown, but we see how immediately the numbers rose coming out of the lockdown, and we see that number rising again beginning of 2021. And that red small arrow on the right is what's representing the cooling down in buyer demand that we see right now. It's certainly a drop, but still ahead of the historical level if you compare to the white dotted line. And this is what Odetta Kushi said in regards to this. We are seeing some signs of softening in the housing market, but context is important here. We're still very much in a seller's market, but we're seeing some early signs of softening. Now, Odetta said context is important, meaning we need to look at the entirety of the housing market rather than focusing just on the recent drop in homebuyer demand. So let's look at a few things that will put us into context. If you look at the Showing Times monthly index, you can see we've recorded 189 for the most recent month in July, which is slightly lower than July last year at 200. Now, if you remember last year how crazy and erratic the housing market was coming out of the lockdown represented here in the red bars, it's actually not a fair comparison. Because last year really wasn't the normal market. The normal market would be pre-COVID, and if you look at the number for July 2019, the yellow dotted line, that number was at 123. So you can see that the current buyer demand is still well above the normal market. Now, Oho Labs puts us into deeper perspective in regards to this, and this is what they said. The US housing market continues to be ultra competitive even as new COVID cases surge, but new data shows the level of competition and ensuing price increases may be cooling off just slightly. Data shows that 49.6% of homes sold for more than the initial list price in July, far ahead of the number reported in July 2020, when 26.8% of homes were sold above initial asking price, but below June's total, when 50.4% of homes sold for more than initially listed. Now, what they're saying can be a little confusing to understand, so let's graph this out. So what Oho Lab is saying is that back in 2020, 26.8% of homes in the US were sold above the listing price, but that number went up to 50.4% in June this year and dropped slightly to 49.6% in July. To recap, last year in July, 1 out of 4 homes were sold above the listing price, but right now, 1 out of 2 homes are being sold above the listing. So by looking at this data, can you really say that the housing market is cooling down? This puts things into a different perspective, doesn't it? Okay, so let's move on and talk about home price appreciation. I've mentioned before that we had 10% total home price appreciation last year. Okay, so how about this year? What are the experts expecting for this year? If you look at this graph, this is the latest projection by the experts. They're projecting from 14.8 to 10.3, and if you average this out, it's 12.46%. If their projection is correct, this is much higher appreciation than last year. Now, I also have the latest projection on next year's appreciation, but before we see that, I want you to take a look at this first. The graph I'm about to show you will lead to explaining next year's projection. This is the graph on new monthly listing counts going back to 2017. If you look at the graph for 2017, 18, and 19, you can see that these are almost identical. They indicate numbers of listings peaking in May and slowly coming down to December. Now, this is what happens in the normal traditional market. Each year, graphs draw a smooth bell curve. But what happened in 2020? If you look at the orange graph, you can see that we were on a similar trajectory until we met the pandemic lockdown and people started pulling their homes off the market. Now, even after the lockdown, the numbers of listings never rose back to the levels we see in 2017, 18, and 19. This is because people were uncertain about the future and feared people coming into their homes due to health reasons. Now let's lay in the graph for 2021. If you look at the green graph, it looks similar to the traditional graph, but what's interesting is that it set such low numbers, but that number continues to rise to June and it plateaus to July. Now we have to continue to look to see what will happen, but it's obviously one or the other. If numbers continue to rise, we're going to see lower or healthier level of home price appreciation, but if the number starts to fall, we're going to see a higher level of home price appreciation. But all in all, home prices will not depreciate because this is what the experts are projecting for next year. From 8.4 to 3.1%, if I average these projections, I can say they're projecting 5.5% home price appreciation for next year. Whether the numbers of listings continue to rise or fall from where we now stand, home prices are going to continue to appreciate and homes will get more expensive. Now let's move on and talk about affordability. This seems to be a big concern to people right now with rapidly rising home prices, and they're saying homes just aren't as affordable anymore. So let me bring you context and clarity on this subject. If you look at this graph, it's clear why people are starting to question affordability. This chart shows how monthly mortgage payment has changed recently, and you see how the number remained somewhat steady since April last year, but it starts to rise rapidly starting March. And this is a direct reflection of the rising home prices we see in the current market. And if you look at this graph, you can see how rising mortgage payment amount is affecting affordability. This graph indicates a score as to how affordable homes are each month, and the higher the graph, the more affordable homes are. And you can see homes were much more affordable in January, but as times pass, it's becoming less affordable. Now, this is starting to spark fear for consumers because this data is fact, and it's very real. So with this rising mortgage payment, let's take a look at how much of your income is needed to make a mortgage payment today. We see here that beginning of the year, the percentage of income needed to make a monthly mortgage payment was at 13.4%, but that rate rose to 17.1% recently. But please keep in mind that this is still below the historical average. The historical average for this country is at 21.2%. Now, this is what Freddie Mac and NAR said about monthly mortgage payments. On Essential Guide to Creating a Home Buying Budget, Freddie Mac said, most lenders agree that you should spend no more than 28% of your gross monthly income on a mortgage payment, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And NAR said, the 25% mortgage payment to income share takes into consideration that a homeowner has other expenses such as property insurance, taxes, utilities, and maintenance, so that total housing expenses are no more than 30% of income. Housing costs are not burdensome if they account for no more than 30% of income. So these experts are saying spending 25% and even up to 30% of your income towards your monthly mortgage payment is still affordable and not burdensome. We can put this into context by looking at this graph. This represents mortgage payment as a percentage of income. The green bar is where we are now at 17.1%, and the orange bar represents the historical average at 21.2%. But you can see we're still far lower than NAR's guidance that said 25%. So if you were to compare 17.1% to where we were several months ago, that is certainly less affordable, but if you compare 17.1 to historical average of 21.2 and NAR's guidance of 25%, you can see that homes are not unaffordable. Well, this is all I have for you today, and I hope what I covered will help you make a wise real estate decision. According to the experts, it seems the longer you wait, homes are going to get more expensive and less affordable. I'll see you again next month with more valuable, up-to-date real estate information. Goodbye.